Welcome to our deep dive into phenomenology. It's a bit of a mouthful, right? But stick with us, because phenomenology is all about exploring something you're already very familiar with, your own experience.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. Phenomenology challenges us to think differently, to go beyond just the surface of things.
It really does. It makes you realize how much our individual perspectives shape our understanding of the world. I mean, two people can witness the same event, but have completely different reactions to it internally.
Exactly. And that's one of the core principles of phenomenology, the emphasis on subjective experience. There isn't one right way to see things. There's a multitude of perspectives out there.
And to understand those perspectives, we've got to look at the core principles of phenomenology and delve into the work of some of the pioneers in this field.
Sounds good. Let's start with one of the most interesting and maybe a bit mind-bending concepts in phenomenology: bracketing.
Bracketing?
Yeah, it's also known as epike. It basically involves setting aside our preconceptions and biases, almost like hitting a reset button on our perceptions.
So instead of relying on what we think we know, we kind of clear the slate and try to experience things with fresh eyes.
Exactly. It allows us to get back to that raw data of our experience, unfiltered by all the assumptions and judgments we usually bring to the table.
That sounds like a real challenge, to be honest.
It can be, but that's what makes it so powerful. This bracketing helps us to really delve into the core of subjective experience.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
And this leads us to another fundamental concept: intentionality. It basically suggests that our consciousness is always directed towards something. Think about it. Are you ever truly not focused on anything?
Now that you mention it, even when my mind feels blank, there's still some kind of internal chatter going on.
Exactly. It highlights the active role consciousness plays in shaping our experiences. It's constantly working, engaging with the world, even when we're not consciously directing it.
So we're not just passive observers. We're actively participating in creating our own realities.
You got it. And this brings us to the idea of the life world, or Lebenswelt, as it's sometimes called. Think of it as the world as we experience it naturally and intuitively.
Like the smell of coffee in the morning, the feeling of the sun on our skin, the sounds of the city.
Yes, those everyday experiences that make up the fabric of our lives. Phenomenology encourages us to appreciate the richness of these seemingly ordinary moments.
It's about finding the meaning in the everyday. I like that.
Now, to delve deeper into these ideas, we need to meet the minds behind them. Two prominent figures in phenomenology are Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger.
All right, let's start with Husserl. He's often called the father of phenomenology, right?
That's right. Husserl wanted to bring a sort of scientific rigor to the study of experience.
So he wasn't just interested in philosophical musings. He wanted to develop a systematic way of examining subjective experience.
Exactly. His works, like logical investigations and ideas pertaining to a pure phenomenology, laid the foundation for phenomenology as we know it. His ideas on intentionality and the bracketing method we talked about earlier were groundbreaking.
And then Heidegger came along and sort of took those ideas to the next level.
You could say that. Heidegger tackled some of the really big questions about existence, the meaning of being, our relationship with the world. His famous work, Being and Time, is a deep dive into these fundamental questions.
I've heard of Being in Time, but I'll admit it's one of those books that's been sitting on my shelf for a while, intimidating me.
It's definitely a challenging read, but it's packed with profound insights that continue to be debated and discussed even today.
And didn't Heidegger introduce that idea of Dasein, right?
He did. Dasein is a way of describing human existence as being in the world. It emphasizes just how interconnected we are with our surroundings.
So it shifts the focus from individual consciousness to our relationship with the world around us.
Precisely. It forces us to reconsider how we interact with the world and recognize that we're not just separate, isolated beings. We're fundamentally entwined with our environment.
I can already see how this is going to be a lot to unpack.
It definitely is. And Being in Time really gets into the complexities of that relationship between ourselves and the world.
It seems like we've covered a lot of ground already, and I think this is a good place to pause for now. We've laid a strong foundation.
Yes, we have.
Welcome back to our deep dive into phenomenology. We've talked about the foundation and the pioneers, but now it's time to go deeper into some of the key concepts that really make phenomenology so relevant and impactful in our lives.
It's where the rubber meets the road, you could say. This is where we can really start to see how phenomenology can shift the way we understand ourselves and the world.
I'm ready to go deeper. What's first on the list?
Well, we have to revisit Heidegger's idea of being in the world. It's such a revolutionary concept because it really challenges that traditional idea of us being passive observers.
Right, like we're just taking in information about the world without actually impacting it.
Exactly. Heidegger's saying, no, 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 we are active participants, shaping and being shaped by our surroundings constantly.
It's like a constant dance then, back and forth between us and the world.
I like that analogy. And think about it, even our everyday interactions with objects. We use a phone to communicate, a pen to write, a chair to sit on. These objects hold meaning within our lives, and our interactions with them, even the most simple ones, become part of our experience.
It makes you realize how much even those seemingly insignificant moments contribute to who we are.
Precisely. Heidegger wants us to recognize that deep interconnectedness between ourselves and our environment. It's not just about what's out there, it's about how we relate to it, how we're a part of it.
That's pretty profound.
It is.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another really important idea in phenomenology: embodiment.
Ah, yes. This is where Merleau-Ponty comes in, right?
He's the guy. Merleau-Ponty was all about how our bodies are not separate from our minds. They're not just vessels. They're central to how we experience the world.
It's not just what we think, it's how we feel, how we move, how our senses take in information.
All of that. Merleau-Ponty argued that our bodies are literally our way of being in the world. His book, Phenomenology of Perception, is like the Bible for understanding this concept.
So it's not enough to just think about experience in a purely abstract way. We have to consider the role of our physical presence, our senses, our movements in shaping how we perceive and understand things.
Couldn't said it better myself. It's like, think about the difference between listening to a recording of a concert and actually being there in the crowd, feeling the music vibrate through you.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great example. Being there, physically present, adds this whole other layer to the experience that you just don't get from a recording.
It's about engaging with the world through our senses, not just our minds. And speaking of engaging with the world, we can't forget about another crucial aspect of human experience: time. Heidegger considered time to be absolutely fundamental to understanding Dasein. What are your thoughts on how time shapes our being in the world?
Time. It's funny because we often think of it as this linear thing, past, present, future.
Yeah.
But phenomenology makes you realize that our experience of time is much more fluid, much more intertwined with who we are.
It is, isn't it? Our existence isn't static. We're constantly evolving, changing, being shaped by the past, and projecting ourselves into the future. Phenomenology really digs into how this temporal dimension, this experience of time, shapes our understanding of ourselves.
It's like time and identity are woven together, constantly influencing how we see ourselves and our place in the world.
Exactly. The past informs our present, our hopes and fears about the future shape how we act today. But it's also important to remember that our individual experience isn't just shaped by our internal world, right? We have to acknowledge the social dimension of being in the world as well.
Oh, you're talking about intersubjectivity.
Yeah.
That idea of how we connect with other minds, share our experiences, build relationships.
You got it. We don't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
We're constantly communicating, interacting, trying to understand each other's perspectives. All of that shapes our sense of self, our place in the world.
So it's not just about introspection. It's about recognizing the impact of our relationships, the way we connect with others, on our overall experience.
It's about recognizing that we're not isolated individuals. Our interactions with other people, the way we understand their perspectives, how we relate to them, it all plays a role in shaping who we are.
And that's a great segue into talking about the real-world applications of all these ideas. I mean, we've talked about being in the world, embodiment, temporality, intersubjectivity. They all seem so interconnected, like they paint this rich, complex picture of what it means to be human.
And what's so exciting is that these aren't just abstract ideas. They have practical implications in so many different fields.
I was just thinking that. So give us some examples. How is this philosophical framework actually being put to use in the world?
Well, one of the most notable areas where phenomenology has had a huge impact is in psychology and psychiatry.
It makes sense when you think about it. If you want to understand someone's mental and emotional state, you have to understand their unique way of experiencing the world, right?
Exactly. Therapies like existential therapy, which focuses on helping people find meaning and purpose in life, draw heavily on phenomenological principles. It's about acknowledging and exploring that individual's lived experience, meeting them where they are, so to speak.
Not trying to fit them into some predetermined box or impose solutions on them.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where they feel heard and understood, where they can really delve into their own experiences and come to their own conclusions. And beyond therapy, phenomenology has had a big impact on how we understand things like art and literature.
That's interesting. How does it apply to something like art?
Well, think about how two people can look at the same painting and walk away with completely different interpretations. Phenomenology helps us to unpack how those individual interpretations are formed, how our unique perspectives and experiences shape our engagement with art. It really highlights that subjective element of aesthetic experience.
So it's like phenomenology gives us this new lens to see the world through. We start to appreciate the nuances and the complexities of our own experiences and those of others.
It definitely encourages a deeper level of engagement, and not just with art, but with everything around us. And even cognitive scientists are using phenomenological insights to study consciousness, perception, the connection between the mind and body.
So it's not just philosophical musings, it's informing real scientific research.
It's a testament to the power of these ideas. And don't forget about the impact on ethics and social philosophy.
Right. We can't leave that out. How has phenomenology influenced those areas?
By really emphasizing the importance of understanding the lived experiences of others, particularly those who are marginalized or whose voices are often silenced.
That resonates with me so much. I think if we want to create a more just and compassionate world, we have to be willing to step outside our own bubbles and try to understand the experiences of people who are different from us.
And phenomenology offers a framework for doing just that. By engaging with the life worlds of others, their challenges and their joys, we can cultivate empathy, make more ethical choices, and really work towards positive social change.
It's a powerful reminder that we're all connected, that our individual experiences are part of a larger tapestry.
That's a beautiful way to put it. But like any philosophical approach, phenomenology has its share of critics.
Oh, for sure. Nothing's perfect,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. No approach is without its limitations.
So what are some of the criticisms that people have leveled at phenomenology?
Well, one of the big ones is this concern that by focusing so much on subjective experience, we might lose sight of objective reality and scientific rigor.
So it's like critics are worried that it gets too caught up in individual perspectives and loses the bigger picture.
That's one way to look at it. There's a worry that this emphasis on subjective experience could lead to relativism, this idea that there's no real truth, just a bunch of opinions.
That's an interesting point. If everyone's experience is equally valid, how do we establish any shared understanding of the world?
It's a question that phenomenologists grapple with. But they would argue that acknowledging the importance of individual perspectives doesn't mean we throw objectivity out the window completely.
It's more about recognizing that our understanding of the world, even of objective facts, is always shaped by our own experiences and perceptions.
Exactly. It's about the interplay between those two things. Another criticism that comes up a lot is the complexity and the density of phenomenological writing. Heidegger, in particular, can be quite challenging to read.
I'll admit I've struggled with some of those texts.
Critics often say that the language can be too abstract, too obscure, which makes it difficult to grasp and apply these ideas in a practical way.
I can see how that would be frustrating. It's like you need a PhD in philosophy just to get through some of those books.
Well, proponents of phenomenology would argue that the complexity is necessary because these are complex ideas. They'd say that the effort is worth it because of the profound insights that you gain from grappling with those texts.
Like, it's hard work, but the reward is a deeper understanding of yourself and the world.
Exactly. Like diving deep into the ocean, you need specialized equipment to navigate the complexities and uncover those hidden treasures. And there's also the critique that phenomenology, with its focus on individual experience, sometimes neglects to consider the broader societal and structural forces that shape our lives.
So it's like looking at a tree without considering the forest it's a part of.
A good analogy. It's a valid point that phenomenologists have to contend with. It's not enough to just understand the individual experience. We have to connect it to that larger social context.
So it's about finding that balance, recognizing both the power of individual experience and the influence of the systems and structures we're all a part of.
That's the ongoing challenge. It's a complex issue that continues to spark debate and scholarship within the field.
But that's also what makes phenomenology so dynamic and exciting, right? It's not just a set of static doctrines. It's a living tradition, always evolving, always responding to new questions and challenges.
I agree. That's what keeps it relevant and interesting.
We've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those fundamental principles to the key concepts, the applications. even the criticisms.
Mm.
It's clear that phenomenology is a rich and multifaceted field of study.
It's been a fascinating exploration.
And now it's time to bring this journey to a close. Let's see. So as we wrap up our deep dive into phenomenology, let's try and distill some of the key takeaways for our listeners. What are the big things you think they should remember about this approach to understanding the world?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that phenomenology offers this unique perspective, right? It shifts our attention away from those objective facts and figures and towards the richness and complexity of lived experience.
It reminds us that our individual perspectives, the way each of us experiences the world, matters.
Absolutely. Each of us brings this whole set of experiences, memories, emotions to every situation, and that shapes our understanding of the world in these profound ways.
So it's not about denying that there's an objective reality out there. It's more about recognizing that our perception of that reality is always filtered through our own unique individual life worlds.
Exactly. It encourages us to, be open to the multitude of perspectives that exist out there, to acknowledge that there isn't just one right way to see things.
And I think it's important to remember that phenomenology isn't just this abstract philosophical concept that's stuck in academia, right? We've seen how its principles are being applied in all sorts of fields like therapy, art, cognitive science, even ethics.
Yeah, it's a pretty versatile framework, and it has some really interesting real-world applications. And, I think for me, what's really exciting is that it provides us with these tools, not just to understand the world, but also to live more meaningful, more engaged lives.
So it's about taking these philosophical ideas and actually applying them to our everyday lives, right?
I think so. By recognizing how important subjective experience is, we can start to approach our interactions with the world and with each other with more empathy and understanding.
I like that. It's about appreciating the richness and the complexity of human experience in all its forms.
Definitely. Now, before we wrap up completely, I wanted to leave our listeners with one final thought, something to kind of ponder as they continue their own exploration of phenomenology. We've talked a lot about how our experiences shape our understanding of the world, right? But what about the reverse? How do our actions, our choices, the way we interact with the world, how do those things shape our experiences in return?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's like this feedback loop where we're both influencing and being influenced by the world around us.
Exactly. And it highlights how dynamic being in the world really is. We're not just passively receiving experiences, we're actively creating them through our choices and our actions.
It's kind of empowering, actually. It reminds us that we have agency, that we can shape our own realities and, hopefully make the world a little bit better in the process.
I think so too. It's a call to be more mindful, to engage with the world consciously and thoughtfully, and to really take responsibility for shaping our reality in a way that aligns with our values.
Well said. That's a powerful message to end on. And thank you to both you and our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into phenomenology. It's been a real pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Thank you. It's been a fascinating conversation.
And remember, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep engaging with the world with an open mind and a curious heart. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.